Science and Religion, Introduction. Does science have all the answers to how the world works and how you got here? Does religion have all the answers? Is there a conflict between these two views, between religion and science? Or are they compatible? Well, I guess it depends, in the case of religion, how dogmatic or how fundamental you are. For instance, different religions may think that they have all the truth. They are the correct religion and everybody else is wrong. If that's the case, how can everybody be right? But if you say that they all have the same ideology, the same basic concept, that there is something over and above the physical, something that transcends yourself or the physical, then you can maybe say they're all right. And today, you do have a more of an ecumenical movement. Well, people tolerate other religions or even endorse them. They have their own way of practicing, but nevertheless they don't demonize the other religions necessarily. Unless I say you are quite a fundamentalist or a believe in all the dogma. For instance, the most dogmatic you would probably find would be the Islamic State, where they say their religion should dictate exactly what you do, what you wear, what you think, and that anyone that doesn't think that is an infidel. And they deal harshly with anyone that does not follow their practices. If you believe in Abraham, perhaps you'll be allowed to escape, but otherwise you wouldn't be. They even, if you don't convert and you want to stay in that community, then you're killed. Or if you're a woman under 40 years old into white slavery. So there is a religion that's very dogmatic. But then you get into the Christian religions, and as I say, they're more ecumenical, where any differences are outweighed by their similarities. And some of the Islamic states, where they have the ruler is the head of the country, they can be autocratic as well. And if anyone says anything against their leader or the Muhammad, a price is put on their head and they're followed, even if they go outside of the country. Then you get into the Far Eastern religions, like Zen Buddhism, for instance, where they practice a transcendental meditation, try to divorce themselves from the physical world into the world of the mind or the spiritual. And you, of course, get a number of people that don't necessarily conform or belong to a traditional religion, but they nevertheless believe in spirituality, that there is something over and above the physical. And going back in time too, and we think of often these things as superstitious, but still, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, 1492. He came to the Americas and his crew was starving, so he asked the Indians for food. They said no. So he told them that, and Indians believe that even inanimate objects have spirits. So he said that the moon would be gobbled up in 4 days to show the anger of the spirits. And when the lunar eclipse came in 4 days, Columbus got his food. So we, at least in the Western world perhaps, we think of that as superstition. But wait till you hear what the scientists say about in the quantum world. Everything starts off as waves before they can convert into material or particles. And also in the Christian world, at least, we use the Bible. And you could say, well, there's errors in the Bible. Yes, if you use the Bible to try to describe the world. But if you use it as a spiritual or metaphorically or as parables, then you could say it has truth within that sphere or that domain of spirituality. Now, in terms of science, then, science really looks more at the physical aspects and breaks everything down into its fundamental parts and how they work together. It uses reductionism. For instance, you are made up of 65% water. And water is made up of 3 atoms, H2O, 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen. You also have other atoms, for instance carbon, which is very important. It can combine with atoms of other elements and itself to form a large molecule, which is important for you in all complex life. But the molecules are composed of atoms, and atoms are composed of electrons, negatively charged electrons, surrounding a nucleus composed of protons and neutrons. Normally, there's just as many protons as neutrons and electrons as many as protons. The exception being hydrogen, which just has 1 electron and 1 atom. But all the other atoms have equal number of protons and neutrons and electrons. And to break down the atoms more, you can do that as well. You've had days where you're up and down. Well, you're all up and down atoms. You're all up and down. Well, your protons and neutrons are made up of up and down quarks. There are 3 pairs of quarks, up and down, which you are made of. And there's a strange and charm, and there's also the top and bottom. And the last 2 pairs of quarks don't hang around too long. So the up quark has a charge of plus 2/3. The down has a charge of minus 1/3. So a proton is composed of 2 up and 1 down, plus 2/3, plus 2/3, minus 1/3, or 1. And a neutron is composed of 2 down and 1 up, minus 1/3, minus 1/3, plus 2/3, or 0. Now, there's some speculation that there may be something even smaller than quarks, but there's to date no evidence or observation to prove that. It's called string theory. The only problem there is you need to have, instead of 3 spatial dimensions, you need to have 10. And so far, no one has gone into a different dimension and come back to talk about it. So it's quite speculative. But there are scientists working on it. Now, the size of the nucleus of an atom is to the size of the atom as a speck of dust is to the size of a football field. So you're all, virtually all space. You're 99.9999999% space. So you're pretty nothing at all. If some people don't pay attention to you, like they don't see you or don't hear you, well, maybe that's why, because you're really nothing at all. So why don't you fall then through the floor? The floor is also made up of atoms, which are all space. I mean, you have the force of gravity keeping you grounded, but why don't you just keep going right through the floor then? What's holding you up? Are you a magician? Well, yes. You actually levitate 1 angstrom unit, 10 to the minus 10 meters, above the ground. But what's really stopping you from going through the ground or the floor? Or walking through a wall? Or pushing your fingers through your arm? Well, the molecules in your atoms have electrons which are negatively charged. And the atoms in the floor have electrons which are negatively charged. And like charges repel. So that's what's keeping you from going through the floor or walking through the wall or pushing your finger through your hand. What's that force called? It's called the electromagnetic force. Let that force be with you. Now, you've also had days then where nothing seems to be going right. Everything seems to be falling apart. You can't hold it all together. Well, your atoms, many of your atoms, have a lot of positively charged protons. And positively charged things repel. So what's holding your atoms together? What's holding you together? Why aren't you flying apart? There must be some strong force, stronger than the electromagnetic force. And there is. It's called the strong force. Let the force be with you. Now, as I say, you are actually mostly composed of hydrogen atoms. Over 50% of your atoms are hydrogen. And hydrogen is a quite explosive and quite dynamic element. Used to use it at first in the airships, the Hindenburg, until they started to blow up. Now they have to use the helium, which has two protons, 2 neutrons, and 2 electrons. It's the second lightest element. So if you're in a room and you're getting angry because nobody notices you or because you can't be heard, you feel like you may want to explode, please don't release your hydrogen, because you'd blow yourself up and everybody else in the room with you, because you are over 50% hydrogen. Now, where did you get all this hydrogen from? Before 1929 or so, no one knew. But then Hubble, with the largest telescope in the world at Mount Wilson Observatory in Los Angeles, he saw that all the stars were going away from the Earth. They were all receding from the Earth. What's that mean? Well, that means that space itself is expanding. And if space is expanding, it must have come from a smaller and smaller place. And going back in time, figuring how fast it is now expanding, extrapolating back, figure out that it's started time equals 0, 13.8 billion years ago. What does it mean, time equals 0? How can time not exist? And what was it before time? These are questions that science does not have an answer for. As a matter of fact, Planck, back in the beginning of the 20th century, said that time is not continuous, it's discontinuous. You can start off with 1 billion years, go down to 1 million years, go down to a year, go down to a month, week, day, go down to an hour, a minute, a second, microsecond, go way down to 10 to the minus 43 seconds. And you can divide time no further. It's discontinuous. He called that a quantum. We now call it a Planck time. And also he said the same with space or length. You can only go down to 1.6 times 10 to the minus 35 meters. And one Planck time is the time it takes light to travel 1 Planck length. So, if time can't be smaller than 1 Planck time, then what is there between 1 Planck time and 0? Seems to be something science can never answer unless they come up with some other idea of how the world works. And when you divide in mathematics by a smaller and smaller number, you get a larger and larger entity. Until when you divide by 0, all hell breaks loose.